Leadership development is a topic that just doesn't get enough attention in optometric continuing education programs, at least not in the US, and it sounds like Australia as well.
How do these assessments help leaders identify areas of personal growth?
The assessment is asking other people what they see you demonstrating and not just asking you to rate yourself, because emotional intelligence is all about understanding the impact that you and your behaviors have on other people. And so if you already don't have that, then asking you what you think they think is kind of counterproductive.
Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. Brought to you by Opticare. In each episode, we bring together leading eye care, optical and business professionals to share valuable insights, practical tips, and the latest trends shaping the optical business landscape. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore innovative strategies for practice growth, patient care, and business success in the eye care industry. Whether you're starting your career, managing a practice, or just looking to stay ahead of the field, The Focused View is your source for inspiration and knowledge. Welcome back to the show, Bethany.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited for this episode as well, because we're going to do a bit of a deep dive with regards to emotional intelligence and the exploration of an assessment with regards to what that looks like and deeper understanding on the whole concept. In our first episode together, we really started to get our bearings of essentially what emotional intelligence is. Today, I really want to dig deeper, as I've mentioned, to the practical application of emotional intelligence in leadership. And for the context of the audience, we have alluded to it, but I wanted to re-mention the fact that, I've been through the process of the EI assessment, so it's got a first-hand perspective of what that looks like. And we may or may not be referencing that throughout. But yeah, having been through it, I can understand more than anything the power of it. So yeah, really, really excited about that today.
Thank you. And Michael, thank you for giving the topic this time, because it is so important, and also for putting yourself in a little bit of a vulnerable situation and not only doing the assessment, but being open to talking about your results with your audience. It's very cool. Thank you.
Well, hopefully they get something out of it. So let's see how we go. When we're looking at emotional intelligence assessment or EI assessment and the process of assessment, what components are evaluated generally in an EI assessment, and why are they important for leadership?
So there are different assessments out there, but in general, they're looking at the competencies of emotional intelligence. So the one that I use with leaders looks at 6 key competencies, which, if you remember from last time, are self-awareness, awareness of others, authenticity, emotional reasoning, self-management, and inspiring performance in others. And the reason they're important for leadership is that somebody who is excelling at emotional intelligence, or showing really strong emotional intelligence, is existing most of the time in a state of productivity. They're feeling present, they're genuine, they're resilient, they're able to keep their team in that same state. So it's a fairly happy and productive existence compared to people on the other side who are really struggling with it and are spending more time in unproductive state, feeling limited and feeling disconnected and not able to get things done.
The assessment that we did is a particular one. In general, are they all the same, or would you say that there are better versions of them? And I guess, let's say someone wants to look at this as an idea, like what are some of the features that you'd be wanting to look at in determining the competent assessment tool, or is there a reference guide or anything like that?
I don't know that there's a reference guide, but the things to look for that I feel are important, number one, for sure, is that the assessment is asking other people what they see you demonstrating and not just asking you to rate yourself, right? Because emotional intelligence is all about understanding the impact that you and your behaviors have on other people. And so if you already don't have that, then asking you what you think they think is kind of counterproductive. So I like that other people are asked. One of the other pieces that I like is that in the one that you did, people were not only asked to rate you on specific behaviors. They were asked how important they consider those behaviors to be. And so that gives you a frame of reference for how your own emotional capabilities and your areas of strengths and weaknesses are relevant to your team in your work setting, because your team in your work setting is different than a team somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then there's also a reference to a general group of leaders worldwide. So this has a lot of different frames of reference, which I think is more helpful than having any of those in isolation.
Now, and again, in reflection in doing it, I can see how that relativity with regards to the things that are evaluated in the context of how you see yourself, how your team sees you, and obviously that broader context of how leaders generally are perceived, gives you a few different angles to view it with, I believe, the most important one being the team, because I feel like that's where your influence is, and that's where you're going to feel the greatest net result from this type of activity, and from their point of view as well. How do these assessments help leaders identify areas of personal growth?
So the assessment really helps make the information more specific. Somebody might be listening to this and feeling like, oh, yeah, I stink at that. Yeah, I'm not good with that stuff. And it's hard when you feel like that to even know where to begin. So I think the assessments are helpful because, number one, it's data in black and white. And as optometrists, we're kind of science, math, data driven people. And so it's impossible to ignore a tangible numerical result. You can't deny the information that's in there. So number one is it just makes it real. And the second thing that it does is it really gives focused information. So instead of, oh, I'm bad at this, a couple of specific areas that maybe you are bad at or not as strong at. And then you see other specific areas that are areas of strength that you can build on. So it lets you get really focused and work on the areas that are going to have the biggest impact.
On the other side of things, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see, with regards to emotional intelligence and leaders and discovering these through the assessments? Is there a negative side of it? Is it all positive, or are there aspects that can create some pitfalls?
I guess the potential pitfall that can be created is the one that comes with awareness before you've done any of the work to fix the problem. So, right. You might be going around emotionally unaware and thinking everything is fine. And so all of a sudden it puts in your face that this isn't fine, which can be hard to deal with in that moment. It can bring up feelings of, oh my gosh, people don't like me. Like thinking back to high school, I'm unpopular and I'm not cut out to be a leader. So it can create some self-doubt and questioning yourself when you're looking at black and white results of the assessment. That being said, the realization of this, once people get over the hurt feelings, and I don't see it that often, to be honest, is a motivation to dig in, right? If we've all gotten through a lot of education, we're all intelligent people. And so when we're faced with something that is a challenge or something that we need to improve, most of the time it's let's dig in and improve. And that's what I much more generally see than anything negative that lasts for any amount of time.
Yeah, maybe negativity might not be the right word. It's more like, and again, if I speak from my experience, I think the hesitation with it is probably, what if I find out something I don't want to know? Or what if I find out something that's really bad? Or what, like you said, what if I'm, not at that level that I really thought I was? And because you're now opening it up to other people to basically provide that feedback. From my point of view, when I went into it, it was very much like, this isn't a good or a bad thing. This is basically what the situation is. And for me to know and understand it will allow me to identify areas of improvement. And it's not like a test. It's not, or anything like that. It's an assessment just to recognize what I am or what I could be. And most importantly, identify areas of growth. And I think if you go in with that mindset, it makes it definitely a more beneficial experience. And I feel, again, an assumption that I'm making, that people that are willing to do something like this probably have it in their mind that they're open to improve and they want to improve. So I feel like that's what enabled me to get over that hurdle of, the initial fear factor of actually doing it.
I find that definitely to be true. And the assessment allows you to rate yourself. And you were very similar to a lot of other people in that you rated yourself much more harshly than anybody else was
Right.
going to rate you. People who want to get better at this are people that are self-analytical, they're self-critical, they're looking at the worst, not because they're pessimistic, but because they're always looking for opportunities to be better.
Mhm.
And in general, I will only do these with someone who wants to do them. I've had
Yeah.
contact from a company who says, you have to do this on a leader and they're not interested in doing it. I don't want to do that because it's not serving a purpose.
Understood. Yeah. And I've had conversations with people say, and probably more in the corporate space, to be fair with you, that are maybe made to do these types of things. And, they're straight away like, what am I doing? Like, I'm doing all this, it's not even worth it. And so you can, straight, it's like, oh, right, maybe you're not going to get as much benefit with that context in mind. So I think that's one of those areas of a pitfall. So I guess if somebody is, really curious about this, then that's probably enough of a motivation to get out there and to look at getting this done. So what was the system that we used and a bit more information about that?
This is called the GENOS, GENOS, Emotional Intelligence Assessment. And this is the company, the assessment in which I'm a certified practitioner. So I'm running these assessments for people who want to know these results.
Yeah. So if we actually, and they're the ones, that's what we're going through: the self-awareness, awareness of others, authenticity, emotional reasoning, self-management, and inspiring performance. And it's those categories, I guess, that we're jumping into and doing the assessment on ourselves, and then having our team do the assessment on us. And then obviously looking at a broader context as to the worldwide database, obviously, that this has developed, I guess, over time. When it comes to interpreting assessment results, how should leaders interpret the nuances of the feedback from EI assessment?
So once the assessment is done and everybody is given the feedback, I'm debriefing the information with the leader. And I'm always encouraging a leader to approach the results with just curiosity. Like, this is an opportunity to learn more about yourself, to learn more about how you come across to others, to learn where you can be more effective, where you might not be effective. And so there is a natural tendency when someone has a big gap between where they are and where their team thinks they should be, or where it's important to their team that they be. And sometimes the natural reaction is to get defensive or to try and explain, well, they think that because, or, well, that's not true. But it's much, much more productive to just get curious. Like, the team's perceptions are their realities. It's not asking how they think you feel inside. It's asking how often do they see these behaviors demonstrated. And so they are answering with honesty. And so when you see those results, it's asking yourself, okay, that's different than I thought. Where might that have come from?
When it comes to the discrepancies there that we're speaking of with self-perception, when I was taking the assessment, or anyone that takes the assessment is rating themselves, and then obviously getting that external feedback and having somebody else rate them on the same thing, and then obviously the importance of that aspect. How do you feel like that feedback can be tailored to make sure that it's constructive in nature and not the other way around?
So I think that's really where that curiosity comes in. So you said you don't mind sharing, but on yours, one of the things that came up where there was a gap between what people saw you doing and what they felt was important for you to be doing was in the category of awareness of others.
Yeah.
And it gets specific into what is causing this. And so when we looked at yours specifically, they weren't seeing you demonstrate that you were noticing when other people needed support and responding effectively. Right? So I think you had some ideas on where that might be coming from. And the best thing to do is to go back to the people who rated you and tell them, one insight that I got from this was that I really need to be better at noticing when others need support. Can you tell me where that might be showing up? Or is there an area of maybe I've missed where I can be better supporting you? So you're just going in curious. And very often, just that act alone starts to improve relations because it's showing that vulnerability of a leader, and they're responding to that with honesty. And you're able to have an honest conversation about something that maybe they've perceived for a long time, but haven't felt comfortable or never thought it was appropriate to bring up.
Yeah. And spot on with regards to how I interpreted it. It was like, and for me, I remember going through the results, looking at it all. I was always looking for the ones that I was the most misaligned. Once you understand how the assessment tool works and the categories of grading, for lack of a better term, but it's like, oh, where are my biggest areas of growth? And that's how I was viewing that. And that was something that made me think critically to some extent as to, all right, now that I understand that, because in the example, in the awareness of others, one of those main points was, as you mentioned, notices when somebody needs support and responds effectively. The way that I had rated myself as a number was, I think I was 4.8 as a number. And again, we don't want to go into the metrics as to how it's all done, but the result that I got was 3.7. And so there was a difference there, a disparity of 1.1, which anything over, I think it's 0.7 or 0.6 is quite, an element of that you want to look at. And so when that happens, it's like, this is an area that I do need to take on board. And I think from my end, it was like, I need to be open about it. So try and recognize perhaps when and how that's occurring. But most importantly, and it leads a little bit into my next question, is the importance that I then recognize in terms of sharing this with the people that have undertaken it. Because I feel like that's when the real value is. It's like, now that I understand that this is an area that I can get better on, how can I do it? And most importantly, how do I communicate that I am working on this? And so in light of that, how do you speak to the importance of sharing the results with the team?
I think that's super important because you mentioned before, large corporations, people are used to doing this, and it happens a lot. I hear from people who've worked in large corporations that they filled out some kind of assessment for someone and they never heard another word about it and nothing happened. So for them, the first step, even going back and saying, I just want to thank you. I received the results. I appreciate you taking the time to do it, is already, wow, this leader is more in tune with how I might actually be feeling about this. So it opens a conversation. It lets them know that their feedback was heard and creates a very new, for some people, an honest communication. So super important. And I always tell clients that going back to their raters and sharing some of these results is their first opportunity to showcase some emotional intelligence skills, especially if they've been weak on those, because they've got to go into that discussion with empathy, understanding if maybe because of a past experience at your company or at some other, they're afraid to give direct feedback, or they feel, a little bit skeptical of this whole process, or they feel this is worthless and nothing's going to change. If they see you working to understand their perspective and they see that, they know you're working on your own emotional intelligence, and it just really creates an authentic encounter about the whole thing.
Yeah. And that's notwithstanding the fact that you're getting insights about your qualities that potentially make up emotional intelligence, if that's of importance to you. One thing I noticed with the categories is in the category of awareness of others, which is what we're highlighting in this instance, obviously with context to my assessment. It does put it down to a productive state as well. And in this instance, it seems to be empathetic or empathy related. The way that this assessment, I guess, in this tool starts to deep dive the emotional intelligence component and a breakdown of it is a couple of ways. With self-awareness, it's being present. With awareness of others, it's empathetic. With authenticity, it's genuineness. Emotional reasoning, expansive. Self-management, resilient. And then inspiring, performance, empowering. Is there any one of those? Because again, for me, empathy, and I've mentioned that in the previous episode, empathy always sticks out to me as one of the main elements of emotional intelligence. Does any one of those aspects play a more important role when you're looking at your assessment results, or are they all just as important as one another?
I think it depends on the context of your workplace. And that's kind of one of the neat things about this is it's asking the people as they're rating you to rate what is most important to them. So you're getting that feedback at the same time to know where your strengths and weaknesses are, but also on your team in your office or your store or your company, what do your people need to see from you the most? And probably, since those are the people that you are depending on to deliver the results and to create the workplace that you're in every day, whatever they say is the most important to
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
has to be the most important to you.
Yeah. And I love that aspect of the assessment where it does highlight what's relevant for your context and your workplace. And I think that brings a real uniqueness to these types of assessments that gives you really that information that you need to improve. And the way that I view it, and maybe people see it the same way or not, is this is not something that would ever stop. You would continually do this because you would want to check in with it and see if there are other areas, because just because you might score well on one doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be the case. This is an ongoing development tool, which I think is really powerful. So I guess in the assessments there, we understand that there's perhaps discrepancies. Maybe we're performing better in some areas and not so in others in terms of wanting to pick up on those areas of improvement. What are some of the first steps a leader should do after receiving their EI assessments results? I mean, we know that we've said communicating and sharing the results is one. Are there any other steps that you would recommend somebody do after they've recognized and they've come to terms with some? And again, we're speaking in context of this assessment. This could be any type of assessment that you've determined that you want to make improvement on based on your research, based on your readings. You've recognized an area and that you want to improve on it. What are some of the other steps that should be considered?
So I think as you go through it, and you saw this with yours, it is a lot of information. And especially for people who struggle with emotional intelligence, it can feel like, trying to drink from a fire hose. It's just all coming at you. So I really encourage people to take a little bit of time with it. And as we're going through it, to write down just a couple of things, like the strong things they're learning about themselves. Maybe they go back, they do it again. And then what I like to see people do is to create for themselves a little bit of an action plan, just a couple of things that they can work on. And I find it really effective when they pick one thing that they see kind of an immediate solution or something they can immediately do to improve, and then one that's deeper and is going to take a little bit more work. So if they can come up with a plan for each of those, that's going to really set them on a good path. So one of these that I think yours was strong, but other people have struggled, is something like honoring commitments and keeping promises is one of the behaviors in the area of authenticity. So this is something that when somebody's confronted with the data that this is an area that they are not demonstrating real well, very often they can understand that immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I take on too many things and I say I'm going to do it and then I can't do it because I take on too many things. So to fix it, for them, it might just be working on being honest about their own capabilities, what they can get done, what they can't get done, and practice giving realistic timelines and saying no to the things that they know they can't do. And so something like that is a kind of concrete, immediate change that people can make. I think some that are deeper and are going to take more work, those really are where we want to draw in other people and let people know you're working on it, ask a lot of questions, and ask people for support.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that point, because that's definitely one of the areas I thought that I would have scored poorly in, because again, in a self-assessment of myself in that regard, I always think that I maybe take on too much. And that's some feedback that I generally get. And in reflection with regards to what you're saying in that instance, I think you can, but if you communicate what you're capable of doing and what you can and what you can't do, then I guess you can level off that expectation of what people think is doing too much with then, I guess, delivering on that commitment or that promise to do things. And so if that's in communication, and maybe that highlighted that perhaps that has been communicated well. So again, it was a surprise for me, because I definitely thought that as an area, that would be something that would come back to me and be like, oh, no, need to quieten that down a little bit. But it's something, again, relative to what I identified with, to put context into it, was obviously making the time to ensure that again, I had a bit of an understanding as to why people feel like they might need my support a little bit more than others, and recognizing what that was and being true to myself with really identifying what that was, and then reaching out to them and saying, you know what, I feel like I could be better. How can I be better? And making the time to just understand what improvements I can make. And that's what I loved about it, because it's a real tangible metric that you can then act on and then see those benefits relatively quickly. And in all honesty, it's not that hard. And I'm speaking that relative to myself. What, someone else might find it difficult, but for me in that context, it's not a difficult thing to do necessarily. So that's what I love about it. And it's a bit of a segue into the next question, and I've sort of answered it from my point of view, but can you provide some examples or strategies that have successfully improved a leader's emotional intelligence?
So just a great example that comes to mind is a practice manager who I worked with. And through this, she learned that her team needed her to adjust how she was responding when they brought her problems. And it was interesting. She had great capability to respond to problems. They all were very complimentary of how she responded when a patient had an issue. But when her team had an issue and someone came to her with a problem, she had an immediate harsh response and started looking for who to blame. And she learned this about herself by seeing an area of weakness and asking for additional feedback. Like, what do you think is causing this? What are some examples? And so once it was pointed out to her, she was able to see that in herself. She said, yeah, they're right. I do start looking right away for who I can blame. And then she knew, and she could catch herself doing it. Or if she was all caught up in the moment and she didn't catch herself doing it, her team would catch her because she told them that she wanted to get better with this. So almost immediately, within a day or two after that, somebody brought her a problem and she realized it, and she took a deep breath and answered the way that she wanted to answer. And somebody else who was in the room caught her eye and just gave her a thumbs up. And so she got immediate feedback from the team in the moment, like, you're making this better.
Yeah. And then it just speaks to the power of it. And like you just said there, the speed as to which that feedback comes back, which is awesome. How can leaders ensure that the improvements in AI are perceived positively by their team? Is there any instance where it can be negative in that regard? And how can we ensure that, if there is, that it is generally all positive with regards to areas? Because maybe there's one area that's just, oh, hold on, like that's really poor. And I wouldn't say that one would be necessarily ashamed of it, but it's like, well, this is really something that we should be good at, and there's a recognition there. And then that could be then, I don't know, maybe a bit of a spiral for it to be something that's just highlighted in a negative fashion, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you get these results, and I said this when you did them, and I say this to all of the leaders that I do this with, is that the results of the assessment are really just for you. So this is not something that you're putting up in the lunchroom with the work for people to see all of your areas of weakness. Like,
Gotcha.
Even if you were strong enough to do that, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
So I think where it can be perceived negatively is if the team perceives like that you're not being genuine and you're only doing this because you have to. And so this is why it's important to pick the things that you can get right away. And very often we see that just working on one or two things creates improvement in a lot of different categories. So it's not, if you get 20 categories that are off, you don't have to go 1, 2, 3, all the way through 20. One helps several others. But this whole process opens a conversation where you can ask them. So once you've decided on an improvement that you want to make or an insight you've had, you go to your team, you're maybe asking them more questions, sharing some thoughts about it, and then you can go back to them 3 or 4 weeks later and ask, I told you I was working on this, being honest, how am I doing? And just be there, be present, and be open. And as long as they believe that you really want an honest answer, they will give it to you.
And I think that speaks to the nature of the question with regards to it being positively received, because I think a part of that is that continuation of improvement, I guess, because you want to meet, you want to be able to say that you're improving, but then you've got to follow up on that in some capacity, because I think where it may be not perceived positively is if you do nothing about it. Like, you say, I've recognized and I've done. And then all of a sudden there is no action. And I think that maybe speaks to what you were saying earlier with regards to somebody that's not that passionate about doing it, never gets the feedback. And so what was the point of all that? And I think it's probably a highlight of that in context. And so if we're now talking about the sustaining and expanding emotional intelligence based on what we've just, done, how can leaders ensure that they sustain the improvements that they've made with these assessments and with this recognition over time?
So this is where I think self-awareness comes in. So we talked a lot about empathy and awareness of others, which is critically important, but this is where being aware of yourself comes into play. So, even those of us who are amazing at this are constantly in flux between that productive and unproductive state. Nobody is perfectly emotionally intelligent 100% of the time. You're reacting to stuff in your environment. You're hungry, you're tired, whatever you are. So gaining self-awareness, the easiest thing or the biggest thing that lets you know when you've shifted to the unproductive side, because that's what lets you recognize it, course correct, and get back on track. Or if you can't course correct it, to remove yourself from a situation completely. There are times where you can't get things under control enough, and those aren't the times to be having critical conversations. And you can be honest and say, right now, all I can think about is anger and frustration. It's not going to be a productive conversation. I'm going to go for a walk and let's come back at this tomorrow morning. And that's emotional intelligence as well.
And do you feel that the assessments help one do that from what you've seen in your experience with regards to those types of thoughts and processes?
The assessments are a starting point. So it can let you know if people don't think you have much self-awareness. And maybe you think you do. It doesn't matter if they don't. And then it starts the process of looking at what can you be doing to gain this insight? How are you going to learn to look at yourself differently, or to look at yourself and do something with what you're seeing instead of just barreling onwards with not the best version of who you are? So I think most of what the assessment does is it creates awareness. Your response to it opens conversation, and then it really lets you target the work that you want to do into a specific area. So now instead of, working to improve your overall emotional intelligence, you're working to make sure that the people on your team have the support that they need. And that's why it feels easy. That's what this does. It breaks down a really unwieldy topic into segments that feel, okay, I can do that. And then you do them and see everything else improve.
When it comes to that recognition, we've spoken about communication and feedback and opening up those channels. Let's say we use self-awareness as an example, and it's an area of improvement that we've recognized we need to make. Are there other ways of improving? Do you recommend books, or do you recommend further readings, or is there anything like that you can evolve, or is it a matter of really just keeping it relative to the team?
No, there are books, there are exercises. So the assessment comes with, and I don't know that I sent you on, a workbook of tips on what you can do to improve skills in a particular area.
Yeah.
So if there's something like self-awareness and you think, I don't even know where to begin with that.
Exactly.
You can look at the workbook, you can see some of the tips, and then you look at how to improve self-awareness. Like sometimes some of the tips people will say, oh, yeah, I could do that. And sometimes they'll read through the list and say, none of those resonate with me, but that gives me an idea for something else.
Right.
And sometimes they're asking a team, what can I do? And the team will say something really profound, like you need to listen longer, you can speak quickly, but listen longer, letting somebody finish their complete sentence before you jump in with a response, and you try them out and you see what starts to work.
Yeah. Definitely got that workbook. And there might be instances where there are further tools that are required or further processes that you might need to recognize with to help you in that journey. I think that's part of a good assessment tool, I would believe as well. It's that, what does that follow up and support look like to ensure that you are going to get the most out of what you've recognized you need to improve on? Changing tune slightly, but obviously with the same context, what strategies can organizations implement to foster a culture of continual emotional intelligence development amongst all employees? We're obviously speaking a lot about the leader and how they would integrate into their practice and their store and their setting, but how can they foster that with their own employees? And do you recommend that it's something that all employees of a company would do as well as the leader, or is it just very much a leadership thing?
It can be both. I mean, the leader obviously is the one setting a positive example for the team. And, just like when you see somebody show up after summer vacation and they lost 20 pounds, you're like, what did you do? Anytime someone sees someone else creating a positive change for themselves, they start to get curious about how they can do the same. So it's not uncommon that people will ask, how do I get this data? Can I do it? And sometimes they're not even asking for themselves in the workplace, but they're asking for somebody in their life who works somewhere else and can use this with the team. When I was going through the certification process, I was sharing about it. And like my daughter, it's 17 and where she's working and she's able to see some of these behaviors in the leaders on her dance team, and people can see this everywhere. So I think sometimes creating words for these things and bringing specific examples to a conversation lets it become a topic that everyone can talk about together and find areas they can improve as individuals and as a team.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the fact that, anyone could be listening to this podcast, and if you're jumping halfway through, you wouldn't pick it was an optometry orientated podcast, because the nature of this topic is a lot broader than our industry. In this instance, it speaks more to us as individuals and the self-improvement of us as individuals in the context of a team, obviously, as well. So I feel like there's a lot there that can be taken, and to make that available to interested people within the organization, I think could only foster a better team culture and a better environment. So definitely something that I could see being a positive. Do you have any insights, or can you share any information on examples where that companies have integrated these types of assessments or this type of thinking as a bit of a professional development program, or as part of an evolution of an individual within the store? I mean, we often speak about people joining a business and what's their long-term goals, what's their plans. It's more not just about the here and the now, but looking at more holistically at the individual. Have you seen that come about, and what's your experience with that?
Yeah, so this is such a great way to invest in a leader in your business. So this might be something that you want to do yourself, but when you have a manager, a lot of times managers in optometry practices specifically don't come from a background of leadership and management. They haven't had training in this. So to be able to give them a management development tool that generally people think of as only available in a large corporation, but they can get this as a leader in an optometric practice, is hugely valuable. There are seminars on this. If someone hears this and wants a speaker for one, I am available. And like you said it, people tuning into this wouldn't immediately recognize that this is an optometry podcast. And leadership development is a topic that just doesn't get enough attention in optometric continuing education programs, at least not in the US, and it sounds like Australia as well.
Yeah.
So people go to a seminar or a conference with the goal of building their practices, and they gravitate towards a new clinical skill, like they're going to learn about myopia management or dry eye treatment. And what they're not always realizing is that building their leadership abilities and their managers' leadership abilities at the same time is often the thing that makes this new treatment easy for the team to embrace and get excited about, and can be much more successful when you can effectively lead your team to adapt to change and embrace new things. So they should go hand in hand.
Yeah, and that's why, to be fair, I thought at the time that I'm making this a topic, because I totally agree with you on that. I feel like, there is a lot of power in this with regards to whether somebody can embrace it, a leader can embrace it, and then foster that through the team in so many levels, not just obviously on themselves, but with particular, services they want to integrate or plans that they want to create or meetings that they want to have, in that context. There's so much to be had in that regard. And I believe the improvement's almost limitless, to be fair, because if you're embracing these things and these tools and you're making these improvements in this way, it really can allow you to be anything or anyone. And that's a pretty far-fetched statement, but I do believe that. So as we conclude our discussions on emotional intelligence and the assessment and the initiatives within organizations, what final piece of advice would you give to leaders to ensure that they not only maintain, but continue to build on EI improvements that they've made or that they're looking to make?
I really think that your statement of the potential of this really being limitless is so powerful. And as we talked about, as we went through yours and I shared some of my own results compared to a practice owner who's kind of just ended up being a leader because they opened an office, they weren't thinking about the people, or a manager who got their position because they were the technical best at something, is night and day different. And the performance is night and day different. So my advice would be for people to really get past the scary, vulnerable feeling of facing how you might be seen by others so that you can get the information that will show you where you're strong and where you need to improve. I think you can do this as a response to a problem, but you can also do it when you feel like things are going well, because generally the ratings will be the highest and the most accurate when you feel like you're leading effectively and can see opportunity to be even more effective. You want to involve the people around you because, as we said, these skills are not only serving you in the workplace, but with your kids, with your spouse, and all kinds of situations. And really, as you go through this, to realize that the goal is never perfection. The goal is just constant self-improvement, which people who love this are always doing.
Yeah. I love it. I totally agree with what you're saying there. And I think it is an ongoing thing and it's a continual evolution and development. Thank you so much for your time, Bethany. If people want to get in touch with you, if they want to learn more about this and find out more about their emotional intelligence and work on this for themselves or for their practice or their business, what's the best way people can find you?
People can find me via email. My email address is Bethany, Bethany, at leadersofvision.com. They can check out that website, leadersofvision.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm there too, and love to hear from people.
We'll definitely share those in the show notes. So if anyone wants to check those out to get those details and get in touch with Bethany, please feel free to do so. Other than that, Bethany, it's been an absolute delight having you on the show. I've really enjoyed our conversations and going through the experience and the journey. It's been really fantastic. And I definitely look forward to having you on in the future. So thank you so much for all your insights.
Michael, thank you so much for the openness and the vulnerability that you had, and also just the enthusiasm for this topic. I love to see it. So thank you.
Stay connected by subscribing to The Focused View and visiting our website, www.thefocusedview.com.au, for additional resources and episode summaries. We look forward to your company again in our next episode. Until then, keep focused. I'm Michael Nasser. Bye for now.